The lawyer's voice died mid-sentence when the door slammed open and a tall rancher strode into the cramped Eagle Pass office, with snow melting on his shoulders and fury in his eyes. Cora Mercer looked up from the inheritance papers spread across the worn desk, her heart jumping at the sight of the stranger, who moved like a man with nothing left to lose. The rancher's gaze swept the room, locked on her, and for one breath, she felt the weight of something dangerous and inevitable. He pulled off his hat, revealing dark wind-blown hair and a face that carried hard miles, and spoke in a voice rough from cold and urgency. "You need to leave this town tonight," he said, ignoring the lawyer's sputtered protest. "The deed you just inherited is tied to a land grab that will get you killed if you stay." Cora stood slowly, holding the edge of the desk for balance, her carefully pinned auburn hair catching the lamplight. She had traveled 3 weeks by stage and rail to claim the small ranch her uncle left her, a chance to escape the suffocating pity of St. Louis society after the scandal that ended her teaching position. The lawyer, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, waved a trembling hand at the rancher. "Mr. Granger, this is highly irregular," he said. "Miss Mercer has every legal right to Cottonwood Ranch." The rancher, Granger, turned his steady, dangerous gaze on the lawyer, and the older man shrank back. "Legal does not mean safe," Granger said. "The railroad wants that land, and they are not asking politely anymore." Cora felt a flicker of irritation cut through her shock. She had survived whispers and pointed fingers after failing to protect a student from a violent father, had endured the humiliation of being dismissed from a position she loved, and she would not be frightened off by a stranger with dramatic warnings. She straightened her spine and met Granger's eyes directly. "I have nowhere else to go," she said, keeping her voice level. "And I do not run from threats." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of surprise or respect, quickly buried. "Then you are braver or more foolish than most," she said. "The railroad hired men who do not care about legal niceties. Your uncle refused to sell, and he died 3 weeks later. The doctor called it heart failure, but the timing was convenient." The words landed like a blow, and Cora gripped the papers tighter, the edges biting into her palms. She had never met her uncle, knew him only through one letter inviting her west if she ever needed refuge, but the idea that he had been murdered for refusing to surrender his land sent cold anger through her chest. "Why are you warning me?" she asked. Granger hesitated, his jaw tight, then glanced at the lawyer before answering. "Because Cottonwood Ranch borders mine," he said. "And because the same men who wanted your uncle gone are now accusing me of cattle theft to force me off my land. If we do not stand together, we both lose everything." The lawyer cleared his throat nervously and shuffled papers. "Miss Mercer, Mr. Granger has been under investigation for alleged rustling," he said, his voice thin. "I would advise caution in any partnership." Cora saw the muscle jump in Granger's jaw, saw the flash of humiliation and fury he tried to hide, and something in her recognized the shape of false accusation and public judgment. She had worn that same mask in St. Louis, had felt the sting of being condemned without fair hearing. She made a choice in that moment, reckless and driven by instinct rather than sense. "What do you need from me?" she asked Granger. He stared at her as if trying to measure whether she meant it. "I have a herd ready to drive to the railhead in Dodge," he said. "If I can deliver and sell before they arrest me, I will have enough money to hire a real lawyer and fight the charges. But I lost 2 drovers to intimidation, and I cannot move 300 head alone. If you can ride, and you are willing to risk the trip, I will split the profit and use my share to clear both our names. It was a mad proposal, born of desperation, but Cora heard the edge of honesty in his voice and saw the trapped look of a man with no other options. She nodded once, ignoring the lawyer's gasp of protest. "I can ride," she said, "and I will not let my inheritance be stolen before I have even seen it. When do we leave?" Granger exhaled, a sound caught between relief and disbelief. "Dawn," he said. "Bring warm clothes, a bedroll, and anything you can shoot with. The drive will take 10 days if the weather holds, and 2 weeks if it does not." "And Miss Mercer," he added, his voice dropping lower, "if you have family you trust, write them tonight and tell them where you are going. If something happens to us, someone should know." The warning hung in the cold air as Cora gathered the inheritance papers and tucked them into her traveling bag. She had no family left who cared where she went, but she did not say that aloud. Instead, she met Granger's eyes one more time and saw the shadow of something deeper than desperation, something like loneliness that mirrored her own. "I will be ready," she said. He nodded, pulled his hat back on, and left without another word, the door swinging shut behind him and letting in a gust of snow-laden wind. The lawyer wrung his hands and tried one last protest. "Miss Mercer, this is highly inadvisable," he said. "Mr. Granger's reputation is in question, and a cattle drive is no place for a lady of your education." Cora turned to him with a calm she did not entirely feel. "My reputation was already destroyed in St. Louis," she said, "and I would rather risk a hard trail than wait quietly to be robbed." She signed the final documents, collected her copies, and walked out into the bitter afternoon with her heart pounding and her mind racing. Eagle Pass was a raw frontier town, all mud streets and false-fronted buildings, with the smell of wood smoke and livestock thick in the air. Cora found a boarding house run by a stern-faced widow who asked no questions and offered a narrow room with a coal stove and a lumpy bed. She spent the evening checking her small revolver, a gift from her father years ago, and packing her warmest clothes into a canvas bag. Sleep came in fragments, broken by doubts and the low moan of wind against the window. Dawn came cold and gray, with frost on the ground and the promise of snow heavy in the clouds. Cora dressed in layers, pulling on a wool skirt, sturdy boots, and a thick coat, then pinned her hair tightly and covered it with a wide-brimmed hat she bought from the mercantile the night before. She left the boarding house with her bag over one shoulder and walked through the silent town to the edge, where Granger waited with 2 saddled horses and a tense expression. He looked her over once, nodded in approval, and handed her the reins of a sturdy bay mare. "This is Rosie," he said. "She is steady, and she will not spook easy." His own horse was a rangy dun gelding with intelligent eyes and scars on its withers. Cora swung into the saddle with more confidence than she felt, her body remembering the lessons from childhood summers spent at her grandmother's farm. Granger watched her settle, then turned his horse west without ceremony. "The herd is 2 miles out," he said. "We move them north and east through open range, then cut toward the rail line. If we are lucky, the weather holds, and we make Dodge in 10 days." They rode in silence through the gray morning, the wind cutting through Cora's coat and numbing her fingers despite her gloves. She focused on the rhythm of the horse beneath her, the creak of leather, the distant shapes of cattle moving like a dark river across the pale grass. Granger rode slightly ahead, his posture easy, but his gaze constantly scanning the horizon, and Cora realized he was watching for pursuit or ambush. The weight of what she had agreed to settled more heavily with each mile. The herd came into view as the sun broke weakly through the clouds. 300 head of mixed cattle, bunched in a shallow draw, with a single drover on horseback, keeping them contained. The drover was an older man with a grizzled beard and a battered hat, and he raised a hand in greeting as they approached. "This is Charlie," Granger said. "He has been with me 5 years, and he is the only hand who did not quit or get bought off." Charlie nodded to Cora with wary curiosity. "Ma'am," he said, "Wyatt told me you signed on. I hope you know what you are getting into." Cora met his gaze without flinching. "I know enough," she said. Charlie grunted, a sound that might have been approval or resignation, and turned his attention back to the cattle. Granger dismounted and checked the supplies loaded on a pack mule, his movements efficient and practiced. "We will push them hard today to get distance from town," he said. "Charlie takes point, I ride flank, you ride drag and keep the stragglers moving. If you see riders coming fast, fire one shot and get to cover." "Understood." Cora nodded, her mouth dry, and took her position at the rear of the herd. The drive began with a shout and a whistle, the cattle surging forward in a slow thunder of hooves and bellowing. Dust rose immediately, coating Cora's face and clothes, and she pulled a bandana over her nose and mouth as she urged Rosie forward to push a lagging steer back into the flow. The work was relentless, requiring constant attention and quick reactions. And within 2 hours, Cora's thighs ached and her shoulders burned. But she kept moving, kept the stragglers bunched, and refused to let exhaustion show. By midday, the sky had darkened and the wind picked up, carrying the smell of coming snow. Granger rode back to check on her, his face unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. "You holding up?" he asked. Cora nodded, not trusting her voice, and he studied her for a moment before speaking again. "Your uncle was a stubborn man," he said. "He would not sell, and he would not be scared off. I respected that. But it got him killed, and I do not want the same for you. If this gets too dangerous, you can turn back, and I will not blame you." She met his eyes and saw the conflict there, the part of him that wanted her safe, and the part that desperately needed her help. "I already made my choice," she said, her voice hoarse from dust. "I am not turning back." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of gratitude or relief, and he nodded once before riding back to his position. Cora felt the ache in her chest ease slightly, felt the tentative thread of trust beginning to form, and pushed the cattle onward into the rising wind. The snow began an hour later, light at first, then thickening into a curtain of white that reduced visibility to a few yards. The cattle slowed and bunched, nervous and lowing, and Charlie shouted orders that were half lost in the wind. Granger appeared beside Cora again, his face grim. "We need to find shelter before this turns into a full storm," he said. "There is a line of cottonwoods 2 miles north with a dry wash that will give us some windbreak. Can you keep moving?" She nodded, her teeth chattering despite the layers, and followed him as he guided the herd toward the distant trees. The cottonwoods appeared like ghosts through the snow, their bare branches skeletal and swaying. The dry wash was a narrow cut in the earth, deep enough to shelter the horses and give the cattle some protection from the worst of the wind. Charlie and Granger worked together to bunch the herd, while Cora dismounted on shaking legs and helped unsaddle the horses. Her hands were clumsy with cold, and she fumbled with the buckles until Granger stepped close and covered her hands with his own, guiding them through the motion. His hands were rough and warm and steady, and for a moment, Cora let herself lean into the solid presence of him before pulling back. They built a small fire in the lee of the wash, using dried brush and dead wood scavenged from the cottonwoods, and huddled close to the flames while the snow fell thick and relentless. Charlie brewed coffee in a battered pot, strong and bitter, and Cora wrapped her hands around the tin cup and let the heat seep into her frozen fingers. Granger sat across the fire, his face shadowed and unreadable, and finally spoke into the silence. "You did good today," he said. "Most people would have quit after the first hour." Cora looked up and saw the honesty in his eyes, saw the exhaustion and worry he carried, and felt the barrier between them crack slightly. "I had good reason to keep going," she said. Granger nodded slowly, then glanced at Charlie before continuing. "There is something you should know," he said, his voice low. "The men accusing me of rustling are not wrong about everything. My family has ties to outlaws. My brother rode with a gang that hit banks and trains 10 years ago. He is dead now, killed in a shootout, but the reputation stuck. When cattle started disappearing, they looked at me first because of my name." The confession hung in the cold air, and Cora saw the shame and anger in his face, saw the way he braced for her judgment. She thought of her own wound, the student she had failed to protect, the father who had beaten the child while Cora was frozen by fear and propriety. She had carried that guilt for 2 years, had let it define her, and she recognized the same weight in Granger. "Your brother's choices are not yours," she said quietly. "And I know what it is like to be judged for something you could not control." Granger stared at her, surprise breaking through his guarded expression, and Charlie coughed softly and stood. "I will check the herd," he said, giving them privacy. Granger waited until the older man disappeared into the snow before speaking again. "What happened to you?" he asked. Cora hesitated, then decided honesty deserved honesty. "I was a school teacher in St. Louis," she said. "One of my students, a girl of 10, came to class with bruises. I knew her father was violent, but I did not act quickly enough. I was afraid of scandal, afraid of overstepping, and by the time I finally reported it, the girl was badly injured. The father was arrested, but the school board dismissed me for bringing disgrace to the institution. I failed her because I was a coward." Granger leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and shook his head. "You were not a coward," he said. "You were caught in a system that punished you for doing the right thing. That is not the same as failing." His words hit harder than Cora expected, and she felt the knot of guilt in her chest loosen slightly. She looked at him across the flames and saw not just a desperate rancher, but a man who understood the cost of being trapped by circumstance and reputation. "Thank you," she said softly. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling and the snow falling steady around them. Finally, Granger spoke again, his voice rough. "I need this drive to work," he said. "Not just for the money, but because if I do not clear my name, I lose the ranch. And if I lose the ranch, I lose the only thing I built that is mine, and not tied to my family's mistakes." Cora understood the desperation in his words, understood the need to prove oneself against the weight of the past. "We will make it work," she said. "I promise." The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving the prairie white and glittering under a pale sun. They moved the herd north again, the cattle slower and more docile after the hard night, and made decent time despite the cold. Cora's body ached in new places, but she pushed through, focusing on the rhythm of the work and the slow miles passing beneath them. Granger rode beside her more often now, checking on her, but also talking, telling her about the ranch, about the land, about the careful plans he had made before everything fell apart. On the third day, they crossed into open range, claimed by the railroad, and the tension ratcheted higher. Granger posted Charlie as a lookout while they pushed the herd through a narrow valley, and Cora felt the weight of unseen eyes on her back. The feeling proved justified when 3 riders appeared on the ridge at sunset, silhouetted against the red sky and watching without moving. Granger saw them at the same moment, and his hand dropped to the rifle on his saddle. "Keep the cattle moving," he said to Cora. "Do not stop unless I fire." The riders did not approach, but they followed at a distance, keeping pace with the herd and making their presence known. Charlie rode back to confer with Granger in low, urgent tones, and Cora caught fragments of the conversation. "Railroad men," Charlie said, likely waiting for an excuse to start trouble. Granger's jaw tightened, and he scanned the darkening land. "We camp in the open tonight," he said. "No cover for an ambush, and we take turns on watch." Cora felt cold fear settle in her stomach, but she nodded and kept riding. That night they built no fire, eating cold biscuits and dried meat, while the cattle shifted restlessly nearby. Granger took first watch, sitting with his rifle across his knees and his eyes on the dark horizon. Cora lay in her bedroll, too tense to sleep, and listened to the low sounds of the herd and the distant howl of a coyote. After an hour, she gave up and sat up, pulling her coat tighter. Granger glanced over and gestured for her to join him. "Cannot sleep?" he asked. She shook her head and sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his body against the cold night. "I keep thinking about those riders," she said. "What happens if they decide to attack?" Granger was silent for a moment, then answered honestly. "We fight," he said, "or we run. But running means losing the herd, and losing the herd means losing everything. So we fight, if it comes to that." Cora felt the weight of his words, felt the grim certainty in his voice, and realized how much he was risking not just for himself, but for her. She shifted slightly, her shoulder brushing his, and spoke without planning the words. "Why did you warn me that first day?" she asked. "You did not know me. You had no reason to care what happened to me." Granger stared into the darkness, his profile sharp in the starlight. "Because I know what it is like to be alone and targeted," he said. "And because when I saw you standing in that office, refusing to be scared off, I saw someone worth protecting." The honesty in his voice made Cora's breath catch, and she turned to look at him, seeing the vulnerability he usually kept hidden. Before she could respond, a sharp crack echoed across the prairie, and the cattle surged to their feet in panic. "Gunshot," Granger said, already moving. He grabbed his rifle and ran toward the sound, and Cora followed without thinking, her hand on her revolver. They found Charlie crouched behind a low rise, his rifle aimed at the darkness. "Riders coming in from the east," Charlie said. "I fired a warning shot, but they are not stopping." Granger dropped beside him, and Cora took cover on his other side, her heart hammering. "How many?" Granger asked. Charlie squinted into the darkness. 3, maybe 4. "They are trying to spook the herd. If the cattle stampede, we lose them, and the whole drive is finished." Granger swore under his breath, and made a decision. Cora, fire 2 shots over their heads. Charlie, be ready to cover me. I am going to ride out and talk before this turns into a bloodbath. Cora wanted to argue, wanted to tell him it was too dangerous. But she saw the determination in his face and knew he would not be swayed. She rose slightly, aimed her revolver at the sky, and fired twice. The sharp cracks echoed across the open land, and the approaching riders slowed. Granger stood, rifle lowered but ready, and walked into the open. "I am Wyatt Granger," he shouted. "This is my herd, legally owned and legally driven. Turn back now, or explain yourselves to the law and dodge." A long silence followed, broken only by the nervous lowing of cattle. Then a voice called back, rough and mocking. "There will not be any law waiting for you in Dodge, Granger. You are a rustler, and everyone knows it. Best you turn around and save us all some trouble." Granger's shoulders tightened, but his voice stayed level. "I am no rustler, and you know it," he said. "This is railroad intimidation, and it ends tonight." Another silence, heavier this time, then the sound of horses turning and retreating. Cora let out a shaky breath and lowered her revolver. Granger stood motionless for another minute, then walked back to their position. "They will be back," he said quietly. "Maybe not tonight, but soon. We need to move faster, and we need to reach the rail line before they can organize a bigger group." Charlie nodded grimly, and they spent the rest of the night on high alert, taking turns watching, while the cattle settled uneasily. Dawn came gray and cold, and they pushed the herd hard through the morning, driving the cattle faster than was safe, but gaining precious miles. Cora's exhaustion was bone deep, but she kept moving, kept pushing stragglers, kept watching the horizon for riders. Granger rode close, his presence steady and reassuring, and she found herself relying on the silent communication between them. The quick glances and nods that said more than words. On the 5th day, the landscape changed, rolling hills giving way to flatter grassland marked by railroad survey stakes. They were close now, close enough that Cora could feel the tension in Granger's shoulders ease slightly. But that night, as they made camp near a dry creek bed, Charlie rode in fast from a scouting run, with his face pale and his voice urgent. "Wyatt," he said, "we have a problem. The deed for Cottonwood Ranch, the one Miss Mercer inherited, it is not in Eagle Pass anymore. I heard talk in the last town. Someone stole it from the lawyer's office 2 days ago." The words hit like a physical blow, and Cora felt the world tilt. Without the deed, she had no legal claim to the ranch. No leverage, no proof of ownership. Granger swore viciously and spun to face her. "This is the railroad," he said. "They are trying to erase your claim so they can take the land without a fight." Cora's mind raced, panic clawing at her chest. "What do we do?" she asked. Granger paced, his hands clenched into fists. "We finish the drive," he said. "We sell the herd, and we use the money to hire a lawyer who can fight this. But first, we need to get the deed back." Charlie shook his head. "How?" he asked. "We do not even know who took it." Cora spoke before Granger could, her voice shaking but determined. "The lawyer will know," she said, "or he will know who has been pressuring him. We need to send someone back to Eagle Pass to find out." Granger looked at her, conflict clear in his face. "If one of us goes back, we leave the herd vulnerable," he said. "But if we do not, you lose everything." The decision hung between them, heavy and impossible. Finally, Cora stepped forward and met Granger's eyes. "You stay with the herd," she said. "I will go back. I can ride fast and I can handle the lawyer." Granger shook his head immediately. "No," he said. "It is too dangerous. Those riders will be watching the trail. If they catch you alone, you will be killed or worse." Cora felt the frustration and fear rise, but she pushed it down. "Then come with me," she said. "We leave Charlie with the herd for 2 days, and we ride back together." It was risky, borderline reckless, but Granger saw the determination in her face and the logic beneath the fear. He nodded slowly. "We leave at first light," he said. "Charlie, you keep the herd moving north but slow. Stay in open ground and do not engage if riders approach. If we are not back in 3 days, sell what you can and get out." Charlie agreed, his face grim, and they spent the night preparing for the split. Cora barely slept, her mind churning with plans and fears. When she did doze, she dreamed of locked doors and stolen papers, of faceless men on horseback and the sound of gunfire echoing across empty land. She woke before dawn to find Granger already saddling the horses, his movements quick and efficient. He handed her a canteen and a small bundle of food. "We ride hard, and we do not stop unless we have to," he said. "Stay close, and if I say run, you run." "Understood." She nodded and swung into the saddle, her body protesting, but her will iron strong. They left Charlie and the herd behind and turned south, riding into the pale dawn with urgency driving every step. The land blurred past, miles of grass and sky and cold wind, and Cora focused on keeping pace with Granger's relentless push. They stopped only once to rest the horses, eating standing up and scanning the horizon constantly. By late afternoon, they reached the outskirts of Eagle Pass, approaching from the east to avoid the main trail. Granger led them to a stand of trees near the edge of town, and they dismounted, leaving the horses tied and hidden. "We go in quiet," he said. "Find the lawyer, get answers, and get out. If there is trouble, meet back here, and we ride." Cora checked her revolver one more time and nodded, her pulse hammering in her throat. They moved through the town on foot, using back alleys and keeping to the shadows. The lawyer's office was dark when they reached it, the door locked and the windows shuttered. Granger tested the lock, then pulled a thin piece of metal from his pocket and worked it carefully until the mechanism clicked. Inside, the office was cold and still, papers scattered across the desk as if someone had left in a hurry. Cora lit a small lantern and searched the drawers while Granger checked the back room. She found the correspondence file in the bottom drawer. Letters from the railroad offering money for land, letters from local ranchers refusing to sell, and a final letter dated 3 days earlier. It was unsigned, but the threat was clear. "Give us the Cottonwood deed, or face charges for aiding a known rustler. The lawyer will cooperate or lose his practice." Cora's hands shook as she read, and Granger appeared beside her, reading over her shoulder. "They used me to pressure him," Granger said quietly, "and he gave them the deed to save himself." Cora folded the letter and tucked it into her coat. "Where would he take it?" she asked. Granger frowned, thinking. "The railroad has an office 2 streets over," he said. "If they have the deed, that is where it will be. But that office will be guarded, and we cannot just walk in and take it." Cora met his eyes, and saw the same desperate calculation she felt. "We have to try," she said. "Without that deed, I have nothing." They left the lawyer's office and moved carefully toward the railroad building, a 2-story structure with barred windows and a lamp burning in the ground floor office. Granger scouted the perimeter while Cora watched the street, her heart pounding. He returned a few minutes later, his expression tight. "2 men inside," he said. "One at the desk, one by the door. There is a side window that is cracked open, but it is a tight fit." Cora understood what he was suggesting and shook her head. "I am smaller," she said. "I can get through." Granger looked like he wanted to argue, but time was running out. He boosted her up to the window ledge, and she squeezed through the narrow opening, her coat catching on the frame before she pulled free and dropped silently into the dark storage room beyond. Her breathing sounded impossibly loud in the confined space, and she froze, listening for movement. When no alarm came, she crept forward, her eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering under the door. The main office was visible through the cracked door. The 2 men exactly where Granger had described. The desk was covered in papers, and Cora spotted the familiar seal of Cottonwood Ranch on a document near the edge. She waited, counting heartbeats, until the man at the desk stood and walked to the window to look out at the street. In that moment, Cora moved, slipping through the door, grabbing the deed, and retreating before either man noticed. She made it back to the storage room, her hands shaking so hard she nearly dropped the paper. She climbed onto a crate and squeezed back through the window, Granger catching her as she tumbled out into the alley. He steadied her, his hands gripping her arms, and for a breathless moment they stood frozen, inches apart, the stolen deed pressed between them. "You did it," he whispered, something like awe in his voice. Cora felt the rush of relief and terror and wild triumph, and before she could think, she leaned in and kissed him. The kiss was brief and fierce, born of adrenaline and desperation, but it burned through her like fire. Granger stiffened in surprise. Then his hands tightened on her arms, and he kissed her back, hard and sure. When they broke apart, both breathless, Cora saw the raw emotion in his face, the vulnerability and want he usually kept hidden. "We need to go," she said, her voice shaking. He nodded, not letting go immediately, then finally released her, and they ran. They reached the horses without pursuit and rode out of Eagle Pass at a gallop, the stolen deed safely tucked in Cora's coat. They did not slow until they were miles away, the town a distant smudge of light on the dark horizon. Granger finally pulled his horse to a walk, and Cora matched him, both of them breathing hard. "That was the most reckless thing I have ever done," Granger said, but he was almost smiling. Cora laughed, the sound half hysteria and half joy. "Me too," she admitted. They rode through the night, taking turns resting while the other kept watch, and by dawn they were halfway back to the herd. Exhaustion dragged at Cora, but she kept moving, fueled by adrenaline and the memory of that kiss in the alley. Granger rode beside her in silence, but the silence was different now, charged with unspoken words and new understanding. Finally, as the sun rose pale and cold, he spoke. "What you did back there," he said. "That took more courage than most men I know." Cora glanced at him, saw the honesty in his tired face, and felt something shift inside her chest. "I had good reason to be brave," she said quietly, "and I had someone I trusted to watch my back." Granger met her eyes, and the look that passed between them was long and searching, weighted with the things neither of them had said. When this is over, he said slowly, I would like a chance to do this right. To court you properly, not just survive alongside you. The words hit Cora with unexpected force, and she felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent 2 years believing she was not worth loving, believing her failure had marked her permanently, and now here was a man who saw her clearly and still wanted to stay. I would like that too, she said, her voice unsteady. Granger nodded once, something easing in his expression, and they rode on in companionable silence. They reached the herd by mid-afternoon, finding Charlie and the cattle safe and moving steadily north. Charlie's relief was visible as they rode up, and he listened to the story of the stolen deed with a low whistle. You two are either the bravest or the craziest people I have met, he said. Granger grinned, a rare open expression. Maybe both, he admitted. They rested for a few hours, then pushed the herd onward, the rail line now visible as a dark scar across the horizon. The final 3 days of the drive were tense but uneventful, the railroad men either giving up or regrouping. Cora rode beside Granger, the easy partnership they had built now underscored by something deeper and unspoken. They talked more freely now, sharing stories of childhood and loss, dreams and fears, building the foundation of something that felt solid and real. At night they took watch together, sitting close by the fire, and letting the silences say what words could not yet. On the morning of the 10th day they reached the railhead at Dodge, a sprawling town of stockyards and loading chutes, saloons and hotels, all built around the iron veins of the railroad. Granger sold the herd to a buyer he trusted, negotiating a fair price despite the rumors swirling about his name. The money changed hands in a dusty office, bills counted and stacked, and Granger split the profit exactly as he had promised. This is yours, he said, handing Cora her share. You earned it. She took the money but shook her head. Use it to hire that lawyer, she said. Clear your name first. Then we figure out the rest together. Granger stared at her, surprise and gratitude warring in his expression. You do not have to do that, he said. Cora smiled, tired but certain. Yes, I do, she said, because we are partners. And because I believe you when you say you are innocent. They spent 2 days in Dodge, hiring a lawyer from Kansas City with a reputation for fighting railroad corruption. The lawyer took their case after reviewing the stolen deed, the threatening letters, and Granger's clean records. He promised to file injunctions and subpoenas, to drag the accusations into open court where they could be fought fairly. It will take time, he warned. But you have a strong case, and the railroad knows it. With the legal wheels turning, Granger and Cora prepared to return to Eagle Pass and face whatever came next. The train was leaving at sunset, and they stood on the platform, bags packed and tickets purchased, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Cora felt the weight of the past weeks settle over her, the exhaustion and fear and hard-won victories, and she turned to Granger with sudden urgency. There is something I need to say, she began. He stopped her with a hand on her arm, his expression serious. Me first, he said. I have spent 5 years building that ranch alone, telling myself I did not need anyone, because needing people meant risking loss. But these past 10 days with you have shown me I was wrong. You are brave and smart and stubborn, and I do not want to go back to being alone. I want to build something with you, not just survive, but truly build. If you will have me. Cora felt the tightness in her chest break open, felt the years of guilt and loneliness crack apart, and she stepped close to him without hesitation. I spent 2 years believing I was too damaged to deserve happiness, she said. But you saw past that. You trusted me when you had no reason to. And you gave me a chance to prove I was more than my worst moment. I want to build something with you too. I want to stay. Granger pulled her into a kiss that was gentler than the desperate one in the alley, but no less intense. And Cora felt the last of her defenses fall away. When they broke apart, the train whistle sounded, and they boarded together, sitting side by side as the locomotive pulled away from the platform. Through the window, Cora watched the town recede and the open prairie stretch ahead, and she felt a fierce hope take root. The legal battle took 6 months. The lawyer fought the railroad in court, dragging out documents and depositions, proving the accusations against Granger were fabricated, and the land grab was illegal. The stolen deed was returned, along with damages paid for harassment and slander. Granger's name was cleared, and Cottonwood Ranch was secured under Cora's ownership, the two properties side by side and ready to be worked together. They married in the small church in Eagle Pass on a bright spring morning, with Charlie as witness and the whole town in attendance. Cora wore a simple dress of cream wool, and Granger wore a clean shirt and his best coat. And when he took her hand at the altar, his grip was steady and sure. The vows were traditional, but the promises beneath them were earned through hard miles and shared danger, through honesty, given when it cost the most. They returned to the ranch together, merging the two properties and building a life that honored both their strengths. Cora opened a small school in the parlor, teaching the children of local families and finding redemption in each lesson. Granger worked the land with the quiet determination that had always driven him. No longer alone, and no longer carrying the weight of false accusation. They built a home that was both refuge and partnership, a place where the past could be acknowledged without defining the future. On summer evenings, they sat on the porch of the ranch house and watched the sun set over the prairie, the same land they had crossed together during that desperate cattle drive. Granger would reach for Cora's hand, and she would lace her fingers through his, and they would sit in comfortable silence, knowing they had each found what they most needed. A partner who understood the cost of courage. A love built on honesty and trust. A future earned through risk and chosen with clear eyes. The railroad never returned to threaten them. The legal victory had been public and decisive, and the company turned its attention to easier targets. Charlie stayed on as foreman, older and grayer but still steady, and he watched Cora and Granger build their life with quiet satisfaction. The herd grew, the ranch prospered, and the schoolroom filled with children eager to learn. And on the nights when the wind blew cold across the prairie, Cora would stand at the window and remember the 10 days that changed her life. The dust storm and the stolen deed, the midnight ride, and the kiss in the alley. The moment on the train platform when two lonely people chose each other. She would feel Granger's arms wrap around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder, and she would lean back into his warmth with gratitude and wonder. She had come west to escape shame and find refuge. She had found something far greater, a partnership forged in danger, a love earned through honesty, and a home built on the belief that the past did not have to define the future. That sometimes the bravest thing was to trust again, to risk again, to believe that love could last, even after everything. And as the stars came out over Eagle Pass, and the prairie stretched dark and endless beyond the ranch, Cora Granger closed her eyes and felt, at last, fully at peace.